Hi class, in this video I'm going to show you some online tools that you can use to help identify plants. So I've never been in a screencast before, so we're going to see how this goes. So let's go to our browser. Okay, so the first site that I like to use when I need to identify something, especially if it's a tree, is the Virginia Tech Dendrology page. And I'll give you the links to these page in the class site. So if you just remember the name, that's good enough. So this is on the East Coast, obviously, but they've done a really good job of having most trees that you'll find through the entire United States and actually most of North America. And when you go, if you do a Google search for Virginia Tech Dendrology, you'll get this as their homepage right here. And they've got a bunch of information on ID right here. So the first tool that I use very regularly is their fact sheets. So if you go to this part here and click on the fact sheets, it'll come up with, hopefully, internet in the office can be kind of slow at times. You'll get a list of all sorts of plants available. So what I'll do is I usually can figure out what family something's in, and from that I can get a list of useful trees, or I might just know the common name. For instance, I might just want to check for maple, and I could do a add California and display matching species. And these are the common some of the common maples we might find in California. It's by no means an exclusive, extensive list, but it gets you started. What I end up usually using it for is when I come across a plant and I want to know some characteristics about the plant. Like, I know I've got a pine tree and I can't remember if it has 2 needles or 3 or something. So I may go and select a family, and let's say I'm going to do a Monterey pine. So Pinaceae, the genus Pinus. I can put radiata if I wanted to for the species, but let's say I don't know that that's it. And then I will display the matching species, and I'll get a list of all the common pines it knows about in California. And I can kind of go through here until I find Monterey pine. And then we'll bring up a really great fact sheet. And the thing I like about their fact sheets is it has, how to pronounce it. It's got a little thing you can click, and it will say the word in Latin. It's got examples of the needles, the ends of barks, fruiting structures, the end branches it barks, what the tree looks like, and where it's naturally grown. So if I want to see what the needles look like, I can click on that, and it will have information about that evergreen needles. So I'm going to make this bigger. Evergreen needles 4 to 6 inches long, 3 per fascicle, slender, shiny green, persist 3 years. So this is a pine that always has needles in groups of 3s. And then another thing I really like is that it looks like, and it will have common pines that are similar in appearance. So Jeffrey pine that we have here is one of the trees that would suggest is like ours. And so you can compare it with the description for Jeffrey pine. Evergreen needles 5 to 11 inches long, fascicles of 3, but occasionally 2, so it's usually 3, sometimes 2, dark green without bloom, often twisted, and persist 5 to 8 years. The bundle sheath is persistent. So, that gives you a good way to distinguish them. And again, we have the pictures, and it shows where it grows. So that's one tool on the Virginia Tech Dendrology page. The next is, I've made this really big. That's probably good so you can see it. They have an app you can put on your iPhone or your Android. I don't know that it works real well here, but it's pretty good back east. But you have ID keys that you can use online. So it's got ID keys that have lots of choices. It's got the traditional dichotomous key, and it's got a key that just has the twigs so that you can identify it dormant season. If we go to the ID keys, we can use a leaf key or a twig key. We can do one where it asks us questions. So let's do the leaf key. You can just kind of see what it looks like. Yeah, it's in North America. Let's say we're in California, and we don't know the hardiness zone. We'll ask us things like, my leaf is from a tree, it's from a shrub, it's a bramble. Let's say it was a tree. It tells us how many possible matches there are. And then it's going to ask us things like broad leaves, slender scaly leaves, palm-like leaves, leafless ascender and strap-like like the yuccas, or you have a cactus. So we'll say you have slender leaves. And then it's going to give you some possible matches at this point, but there's still 52, so that's too many. So again, we just assume like, this is a Monterey pine, so the needles are long and slender, or scale and all like. So we'll say they're needle-like because it's a pine tree. And so now there's 36 matches. So we got some firs in here, and got spruces and pines. That's going to be the main ones that are going to show up, and then redwoods and stuff. So we still haven't really narrowed it down good. So my leaves appear in clusters called fascicles, which is the pines, or they have single needles that do not appear. And so pine trees, remember the Monterey pine had it in fascicles of 3. Now, definitely gives me a pine, and I can pick how many needles per fascicle. So like Jeffrey pine would be here, and the Monterey would be here. So now I've got 3. So this is the list of trees it knows about in California that have 3. And there's the Monterey pine. So that's how you would use the keys on that. Really good site. Encourage you to use it when you have a tree question. It doesn't have every tree, especially some of the more obscure native trees, particularly on the west side. But the trees that we tend to see in landscapes, or mostly in the wild around here, it gets real trees. Not too good on things that are just kind of big shrubs that are sort of desert-like. So next site that I like to use when I want to identify plants is the North Carolina State's plants database. And this is a really good site for trying to identify landscape plants, things that are actually in the trade that you might find at a store or in someone's yard. So I use this site when I can't remember the name of something, and it has everything broken down into categories. So let's say I'm trying to identify something I think is a pansy. So I'd go to annuals, and it has them by Latin name, but it's got tons and tons and tons. It's got 216 annuals, and I can scroll through and see pictures. If I want to narrow it down, let's say it's a bluish pansy, I can click blue, and then now I'm down to 37 choices. And pansy would be toward the bottom because it's viola. And there's pansy down there. But I could further narrow it down with a green leaf. It's going to give me a nicer view of what my choices are with green leaves. Height 1 foot or less. So I can narrow it down by category, and then eventually you get to the right plant. And it gives you information about it, and it gives you a little QR code that you can print out and scan to someone who wants to see it out in the field. So this site is really good for annuals, shrubs. If you want to know about an abelia, it's going to give you a whole bunch of abelia options. So this is the most common abelia that we grow. But I could use this to identify, okay, I know it's an abelia, what kind is it? And I can look at the different abelias and find out more about it. So that's the North Carolina State Extension website. So for California plants, the best site I've found is calflora.org. This is a fantastic site to be able to figure out what you've got for a plant. And I've used this since I've moved here a lot. So I take a picture of some plant when I'm on a hike and I go, what is that? I have no clue. I can go to this site and I can usually figure it out. So here's some examples of how this works. So I took this picture several years ago up above Rock Creek, and I looked at it, and I know that it's a penstemon, but I'm not from the east side, so I don't know what it is. So I go to a site like CalFlora, and I'll type in penstemon, and I was in Inyo County, but I usually put Inyo and Mono, just because I can't ever tell where the county line is when I'm hiking. And then I could add things like it's an annual, perennial, biennial, but usually if I've got one of the plant names, either common, scientific, or just the family, that's good enough. And I do a search, and then it will give me a list of all the penstemons that grow in those two counties. Now, so it's also going to search things that have common names of penstemon too. So it's going to have some plants that may not appear. But then I could just scroll down until I see something that looks like my plant. We're getting closer here, and there we go. Penstemon heterodoxus. And so I can zoom in and see. So I use this tool very often when I'm trying to figure out a plant. There's other ways you can use it too that are really neat. So in this case, I happen to know something about the name. I knew it was a penstemon, but let's say I didn't know it was a penstemon. I just knew that it was a blue flowering thing, and I was out hiking in July, and I wanted to figure out what it was. So let's say I was hiking in Inyo County, and it was an herb. It had blue flowers, but I didn't. I wasn't smart enough to know what family it's in. I can click on this little thing here that says more, and I know it's a dicot. And I was up in the mountains, so let's say, was it 2,500 feet, or meters rather? It's metric, I'm sorry, can't help that. They were at the site, not me. But I was up in the mountains, so 2,500 meters, and it bloomed in July. So let's see what happens when I search this. So the good news is it found 452 plants that bloom in July that grow up in the mountains and meet my criteria. But I'm going to have to go through 450, and that sounds like a lot of work. It kind of is, but if you wanted to, you had no clue, that's a pretty good way to start. It's worse than not having any idea at all of what you need to do. So here's the next 50. If I do this a few times, I'll get to my plant. Kind of a side benefit of doing this is you get to see all sorts of other plants that exist out there that might be of interest to you. So there's one third other way that you can use CalFlora that's really neat, and that's what grows here. So if I click on what grows here, I use this a lot too. I don't have to worry about elevation, and it also helps me to know how to spell things. You'd never know it, but I struggle to spell the word penstemon. I can never remember how to spell that thing. And with this tool, I don't have to. So let's say I was out hiking in the tableland. So there's the tableland, and I was out there, and I came across this plant. And I wanted to know, what is that plant? And so what I can do is I can go to what grows here. I can click on where I was. That's close enough. And I can search from where I'm at. I can use the family to narrow it. I have all sorts of little things I can do here. So I'm going to say right here, and I hike a lot out there, and I know it's a Menzelia. So, but I don't know what Menzelia, right? So I have to go and figure out what it is. So if I start typing Menzelia, it's going to give me all the options here, and I can just click Menzelia, and it spells it for me. because that's not the easiest word to spell. Alternatively, I could go Loasaceae for the family and search the family. But so there's Mencelia, and I search. And it's going to tell me that it found 3 annuals and 1 perennial Mencelia that grow out there. So I can look. So there's the white-stemmed blazing star, Mencelia umbilicalis. There's Jones's blazing star, Mencelia jonesii, and Mencelia nitens, the shining blazing star. Pretty sure that's what this one is Mencelia nitus. So that's how I can identify it. So what grows here is really good. It works its best when you know a little bit like the family information, but if you don't, you still have ways that you can narrow it down, or you can just use brute force and get through trying to figure out what you're looking at. You can also, where it says plant filter, if you get too big of ones, you can change things to life form to be like an herb or the month that you bloomed in. So that's another technique you can use to help narrow it down. So that's CalFlora. The next site that you can use to identify things is the UC IPM website. You'll learn more about this when we talk about IPM, but they have a weed photo gallery that's pretty good. So I'll give you the link to this, but when you get to their weed photo gallery, you can either just get a list of the weeds if you kind of think you know what you're doing, or you can use these identification tools. They have broadleaf, grass, sedge, and aquatic weeds, or if you've got a weed and a turf and landscape, there's different keys for that. So, let's say you want to figure something out, it's a broadleaf weed, you click on identification, and it's going to give you really easy choices, whether it's spreading or makes a rosette like a thistle, or lots of different leaves that come out of the node. Or are the leaves long or lobed, or different shapes they are. You simply click on the picture and you can figure out what you have. Just as one caution though, the website works pretty well for weeds on the west side. These are all really common things that I learned when I was in college, and then when I moved out here to the east side, we have a lot of these, but we don't have them all, so it doesn't necessarily match up well, especially the grasses. It has most of the grasses that grow on the other side, like poison oak. We don't really have that, so but it's good, and you should know about it as a UC Master Gardener. What I do when I have a weed that I want to figure out that grows in our area that I don't know is I go to Nevada, the Nevada Weed Identification and Control Guide. It's not really an interactive tool, it's just an online book, but it works pretty well. If you scroll down through it, it has most of the weeds that we have around here. So I can use this to figure out what weed we have. Doesn't have them all, but it has quite a few. So it's a good place to start. So that's my summary of some of the online tools that we have available to identify plants. Ever since I have had access to things like Google, I make extensive use of that in the books. Not so much anymore. One nice thing about some of the books is you can thumb through a book very quickly. You would have noticed when I clicked on these websites, there was a long delay between when I click something and it shows up, and if you have to do that for each and everything, it's kind of like channel chasing when you have satellite. It's a few seconds between channels. If you have a book, you can thumb through it very quickly. So the first thing I do when I have a weed question is I go to my library and I get the California Weed book out. I try to find the plant family, and then I just thumb through it and see if I see something that matches. If that doesn't work, then I go ahead and go online and use one of these tools. So hopefully you'll give them a try. Definitely try out CalFlora. Go take a picture of something this spring when there's pretty flowers around and see if you can identify it. Good luck.